I think public education and education in general is the greatest civic issue and civil liberties issue of our time. We will either get this right or our nation will be diminished for the next generation and probably far into the future. You don't need to know much about India and China and Finland to know that we are falling far behind in terms of our youngsters' capacity to be competitive and be educated to compete in the global society. So I thought that I would take a couple of minutes and just give you a broad overview of where we are and what my role is. I'm the Chancellor of the State Board of Regents. It is a body of 17 people. I am elected to that by my peers. I serve for a 3-year term. Maybe I'll be reelected, but you never know. I want to say that the Board of Regents is in charge of educational capacity in New York State. We hire the Commissioner of Education. And that is very different than all the other commissioners in the state. All the other commissioners are hired by the government. The Board of Regents hires the Education Commissioner. Our founding fathers, I think, wanted to be very clear in their attempt to keep political issues at bay when discussing intellectual, academic achievement and competencies that we care about, particularly in New York State, as we strive to have everyone become a lifelong learner so that they're never bored. I do want to take one moment to tell you something that happened to me last week because you're talking about voting, and I actually happen to think that developing our society in terms of our citizens is probably the most significant contribution of public education. I was sitting at a meeting, a woman who works at the Ford Foundation is of Cuban heritage. She's a very, am I allowed to talk about religion here? Oh, yeah.
Everything goes.
Okay. She's a very devout Catholic, and she comes from a very devout Catholic family. And her family escaped from Cuba. And in her role at the Ford Foundation, she's a very important person. And she got the opportunity to travel with her mother to go visit the Pope. And it was just a staggering experience. However, 2 days before they leave, and they made all these preparations to go, and her mother is a woman of 88, and they were going to go to Rome to meet with the Pope. Her mother calls her and says, "I can't go." And the daughter says, "Mom, are you okay?" And she said, "Yes, I'm okay. But we're going to be there on election day. And having fled from Cuba, I can tell you the greatest gift that I have as being an American is my ability to vote." Well, to make a long story short, the senators from New York arranged for her to get an absentee ballot, et cetera, et cetera. She went, and all's well that ends well. But it brings us back to the capacity of public education and its changing role in our society. As many of you know, or may not know, there are 3.2 million school youngsters in New York State. The state of New York spends $54 billion a year on its educational enterprises. If you really cut it down to the exact, it's about over $17,000 on average per kid. And I think for $17,000 on average per kid, although it's not much, we could do a lot better. And so towards that end, when the Board of Regents hired David Steiner, the first thing we asked him to do was to look at our assessment system. How do we assess youngsters across New York State? And how do we report out to families on how their youngsters are doing? And we hired a doctor at Harvard University to look at our statewide assessment and accountability system. And lo and behold, he came back and he said to us, actually, what you are calling proficient in your 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th graders does not align with college ready. In fact, 75% of the youngsters who leave the New York City public school system need to be remediated at City University in either English or math, and most often probably both. Now, we know the challenges, just if you just look at that statistic, 75%, you know what a steep climb we have. Enter, of course, the federal government, and what I hope many of you have heard of is the Race to the Top competition. David Steiner and Dr. John King, who was my fellow student at Teachers College, which is how I know him, I didn't write the application, but David and John King chaired New York State's application for Race to the Top. 6 months before the final event, New York State in the first round came in, I think, 14 out of 16 finalists. In the second round, we came in number 2, right behind the state of Massachusetts, for a variety of reasons. First of all, our commissioner did a fantastic job, as did our senior deputy. But most importantly, because we were able to work with our legislature to get them to move on a couple of very core issues. Number one, the federal government said to qualify for this grant, you need to increase the number of charter schools in your state dramatically. Number two, you need to set up an evaluation system for teachers that allows teachers to be tied to student performance based on some amount of test score. Now, I don't know how closely you follow politics, but obviously you follow it quite well. This was a protracted negotiation between myself, David, John King, and the legislature to get them to work with us, to give us the legislation that would be required to make New York State competitive in round 2. I will tell you that the teachers union at the end of the day came through for us in a very big way in helping us design an evaluation system which ultimately will allow school districts, like a school district like New York City, to base 40% of a teacher's evaluation, yearly evaluation, on student achievement, directly tied to student achievement. This was something that everyone told us we would never achieve. But I will tell you, both the downstate union under the work of Michael Mogu, the upstate union working with Dick Iannuzzi, came through for New York State in a very big way, and I am here to tell you that they were indeed our partners. As for the charter cap lift, it is an essential, I believe, to allow public schools to expand how it is they provide service to families and youngsters. Charter schools are just one of those expansions. To deny youngsters the opportunity to have a choice, I think, is a very limited way of looking at the future, and I always like to be on the right side of history. I don't care what age you are, and I don't care what your experience is. My grandmother passed away when she was 94. She lived alone. Every day she challenged herself. Every day she got up and read every newspaper and spoke to me about Pearl Buck and used to read translations of poetry from Bialik in Hebrew to German to everything. She was never educated formally, but she understood the challenge, and she always told me, you have to keep moving forward. You have to be part of the present, and you have to care about the future. You can't be drawn by the past. You learn from the past, but you move forward.